English translation 396th contact. Saturday, 23rd July, 2005, 17:14 hours.
Man, you are fast. Pius has just gone out.
That is why I got here so fast. Your conversation with him was in line with my idea that you should explain everything to him. I expect, in his words, that he will act correctly in this matter.
To that end, I think he will certainly do it.
The opposite would be very unpleasant, both for him and...
Of course, he is oriented now. Can I ask you a question now?
There is no reason to object to that.
Good, thank you. Then this. Quetzal once said, like you, that the alcohol addiction of the father or the mother is transmitted to the offspring, because the alcohol addiction of both the father and the mother affects the genes in such a manner that they form the alcohol addiction in themselves as a hereditary factor, which is transmitted to the offspring. But what does this look like in relation to diseases in general? By which I mean diseases that are not known on the earth as being hereditary diseases. It would be interesting to know a little more about this.
In fact, there is a general hereditary susceptibility to non-genuine hereditary diseases. It should be noted, however, that this usually only applies to humans whose one or both parents have already suffered from the respective diseases once or more than once, which results in the corresponding gene programming, which is then inherited. Such gene programming is very diverse, because not only actual diseases or predispositions for them are inherited, but also vices, such as smoking. However, fanaticism can also be hereditary, as well as violent temper, jealousy, and obesity. In addition to the fact that a tendency to heart attacks and strokes as well as nervous diseases, stinginess, slovenliness, and an addiction to adrenaline surges can be inherited as a predisposition, along with many other things.
Also heredity in terms of pigmentation, physique, body movements, gestures, tooth strength, habits, and idiosyncrasies, etc. are part of it, as Quetzal explained, and as you explained.
That is correct.
Do you know of a purely natural remedy for headaches?
Since it was just cherry season, I would like to mention the red cherry in this context, whose skin contains analgesic substances that relieve and eliminate headaches. The darker the red skin of the cherry, the more effective it is against headaches.
Then, in fact, an effective drug could be derived from it?
That is also correct.
I have been asked what causes copper deficiency. Can you say something about that, please? Some I know already, but unfortunately not much.
There are extensive ailments that arise, which I will not list in their entirety, but I will only mention a few of them briefly, because otherwise it would go too far. Copper deficiency symptoms lead on the one hand to increased brittleness of the bones, but as copper deficiency also has an effect on brain diseases, with Alzheimer's disease being the most important. With regard to enzymes, copper is a very important component in the respiratory enzyme system and supports cellular respiration. Furthermore, copper deficiency leads to anemia because copper serves as a biocatalyst for the formation of hemoglobin. Copper also serves as an absorption agent for iron from the small intestine. A number of other things are certainly worth mentioning for what...
Interesting. But look here. I have a little book with the title Vitalstoff Compendium by Meier, in licensed edition of Biomed AG, Dubendorf, ZH, CH. It says practically the same thing. Also, that the body can use the stored iron thanks to copper. I think that I will then copy the whole thing and integrate it into the contact report. If you want to see it?
Yeah, thank you.
Ta reads.
What is written in this short publication is good and correct and understandable for the layperson. However, the whole does not include all the important findings which go much further.
Your knowledge in this matter will be much more comprehensive than that of the earthly physicians, which is probably no question.
Which, of course, you are right.
Until the 31st of July, you gave me predictions a week ago. Is there anything noteworthy after that?
That is the case, yes, because on the 1st of August, which is the Swiss national holiday, King Fahd will die in Saudi Arabia at the age of 84, and his half-brother Abdallah will be his successor. At about the same time in Germany, in the Brandenburg area, the notorious deeds of an alcoholic, murderous mother are being uncovered, who for many years killed 11 of her 15 children right after birth and buried them in flower boxes on her balcony. 2 of the murdered babies or their skeletons are no longer found because the 2 corresponding flower boxes were accidentally disposed of. Then again, a seaquake off Sumatra follows, which causes people to be frightened but will remain so. The magnitude will be 5.6. Turkey will also be hit by storms, which will also cause great damage. Bulgaria will also be hit by severe storms, causing major flooding.
This is outrageous. With the murderous mother, I mean.
That is putting it mildly. But now listen further to what I still have to tell you about the future, which is why we have again discussed whether we should continue to make predictions and also name them. Finally, we also asked the High Council about this matter, for which its advice was that we should continue to make predictions and tell you the predictions. That, in order to create a modest contemporary document for future generations, in a small form of special as well as unusual events when they study our contact reports.
We have already talked about this, about the contact reports and the predictions as a time document, and we have found that the whole thing will be a good time document.
Yes, that is correct. But because we only make forecasts for ourselves when it is necessary for us, we thought that we should increasingly do such forecasts for you only for a certain period of time. So to speak, as proof for the Earth humans that it is correct with your teaching of the Spirit, aka creation energy teaching, and with your warnings to humankind and the governments of the Earth.
I see. That is why I wanted the predictions, too, as an object of warning and as a teaching aid for the Earth humans and the governments of the world, so that they may at last let healthy thoughts and their rationality prevail in order to finally build up and make real peace, freedom, love, and harmony on the Earth and among all humankind.
We know that. But we will now act in accordance with the High Council's advice and continue to give you predictions based on our forecasts. But the forecasts will only be short-term, and will always be a few days or weeks in advance, so we will no longer make long-term forecasts. Only for ourselves, in certain cases, we are still active in this respect for longer periods of time. You can, of course, participate in this, but only if you do not make such findings obvious by making predictions for the distant future, and thus keep them to yourself.
That does not bother me, because I know very well to keep quiet, also about such things.
I have no qualms about that, it should only be said. But now listen to what little more is to come until Saturday, August 6th, because then I will already visit you again and tell you some new things. Because then I will be here to personally observe your meeting from my flying device, which I have wanted to do for a long time. Well, in Portugal, the forest fires are blazing up again, and a new heat wave is coming from the continent of Africa to Europe and is sweeping across the Iberian Peninsula. It will also be the time when serious and very serious terrorist threats will be made against England by the Al-Qaeda terrorist network, for which Prime Minister Blair will bear the blame, and all those who are responsible for the deployment of British military forces in Iraq and who do not want to recall it. The threats will openly mention the same words that you have already publicly circulated several times in your bulletins. Namely, that as long as the U.S. military and British soldiers remain in Iraq and Afghanistan, the terror against Britain and the U.S. will continue. Also, other America-friendly as well as English-friendly states will henceforth move closer into the area of direct al-Qaeda terror, such as Germany, which has allied itself especially with the USA. Switzerland, too, will no longer be safe, because on the one hand, the government and many citizens are shaking hands with the USA, and on the other hand, the Islamophobia of the racists, xenophobes, and right-wing extremists, as well as neo-Nazis, etc., will continue to evoke the hatred of fanatical and terrorist Islamists.
So Switzerland can also become a target of international terrorism. That was to be feared.
Unfortunately, and it will only be a matter of time if the Swiss government does not change its mind and try to put things right as quickly as possible.
By your words, I also understand that the neo-Nazis and right-wing extremists, as well as the racists, xenophobes and Islamophobes, etc., must be brought to their senses, in addition to the fact that the willingness to help the U.S. Americans must come to an end, at least in the sense that aid for the acts of war and occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as deliveries of goods to the U.S., must be stopped.
That is what I mean by my words as a whole. But now, dear friend, the time has come for me to go. Goodbye and Salomi.
Goodbye, but, Sahlomie.